Welcome to Raise Your Vibe and Heal. Today's guest is Rosanne Norris. Rosanne embarked on a spiritual path in 2018 after her 30-year-old son Lee passed from an accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. She is an affiliate leader and a caring listener for an international nonprofit organization called Helping Parents Heal, a support group for parents. Rosanne is the author of the book Believe, A Journey of Loss, Healing, and Hope, and a contributor to several anthologies, including Ordinary Oneness, The Simplicity of Everyday Love, Grace, and Hope, and Gathering at the Doorway, an anthology of signs, visits, and messages from the afterlife curated by Camille Dan, who is also a recent guest on this podcast. Rosanne was featured in the award-winning documentary Rinaldi, the story of Brazilian transcommunication researcher Sonia Rinaldi, who for over 30 years has brought through images and voices from deceased loved ones. And if you remember the podcast with Camille Dan, we also talked about Rosanne and the film Rinaldi. She is the mom to 5 beautiful children, including Lee in spirit. It is my pleasure to introduce Rosanne to you today. Hi, Rosanne. Welcome to Raise Your
Hi.
Vibe and Heal.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh, I'm excited too. And I just want to do another shout out to Camille because this is the book that brought so many of us together. Gathering at the Doorway. It's available on Amazon. And that's how you and I met. And truly, I feel like this labor of love that Camille brought together, and with beautiful stories such as yours, it's just a network of
Yeah.
amazing love. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. I've met some of the authors in person, and others I feel like I know them, even though I've never met them face to face, like yourself.
It's amazing what technology can do to bring so many of us together these days.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your son, Lee. If you can give us an introduction to Lee and how your story has kind of unfolded with this since his transition.
Lee, as you said, was 30 years old when he left his human body along with his dog Buddy. He has number 34 is very significant as a sign. I see it all the time. He lived 30 years, 4 months. The 34 came into play. I don't know what it means, but I see that number all the time. I'll glance at the clock and there it is. Lee, the middle child of my 5 children, and he was a little different than the others. He's the only one that had a little comfort, little stuffed thing that he carried around for when he was a little guy. He was weighed in at 11.3 when he was born. Didn't walk. He walked when he was like 18 months old. Maybe that's because he was big, as a baby. He was my kid that had a lot of accidents, but 30 beautiful years of life. It was an accidental carbon monoxide poisoning that did take his life in January of 2018. He had a coal furnace. He didn't close the door all the way. And the final piece was he took his detector off the wall and shoved it in a closet under clothes. We guessed that it must have been beeping. He was a smart kid. He was an engineer, as you were at one time. And he was very introspective. He was a reader. He was very inquisitive, but he was kind of introvert, extrovert. He's very, very funny kid, but you had to get to know him before he would show you that side of him.
I'm so sorry that you as a mom went through that and still go through that. I can only imagine what that must feel like. And for those of us who've never experienced that, can you kind of give us a little bit of perspective on what it was like before and after Lee transitioned?
My life was pretty full and fun, and I loved my life before. Having 5 kids, I was very busy, and 6 grandkids as well. My life was really hectic, but I loved it. After Lee transitioned, I did not want to be here. Quite frankly, I wouldn't have taken any action to end my life, but I wished it was over. The pain, I can't describe the pain, the enormity of the pain. I would have sooner had my hand cut off. My parents had crossed. I've had people leave this life, but this it's just the enormity of the pain. It just feels like somebody totally ripped your heart out. At times I felt I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't function. I really couldn't function. I just sat and stared a lot, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I didn't think it was survivable, really. But here I am, it, 7 years later.
I can't even imagine how much grief you must have been going through with that. Can we talk a little bit about some of the steps that you took to navigate this grief? Did you find yourself wanting to isolate yourself through this, be by yourself, or did you want to be around a lot of people?
I did find myself in isolation at first. Oddly enough, I found a grief counselor early on, 2 weeks after he passed, and I was going out to see him, but I found myself not wanting to be around anyone. It was cold, it was winter, and I sat in front of a window and I just stared out at the cold, dark, bleak winter, and that's exactly how I felt. I didn't care about myself. I didn't really care about my family. I was just immersed in this pain. And I can tell you that isolation is not the way to go. But somehow I knew, despite all this pain, that I had to do something. I didn't know how I was going to climb out of that pit of despair. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to. And just started chipping away at using different modalities to help myself. And quite frankly, I wanted to do it for Lee. I wanted to feel better for him. I always was a writer of sorts. I journaled and I wrote things throughout my life. And journaling helped me immensely. I called it puking on the page, excuse me, but I could get all those feelings out. I could basically scream right on the page and just get all the darkness out. That helped. I started meditating more. I was seeing a counselor that was very open as I started having some experiences. He would warn me not to tell anybody because they would think I was crazy, but he didn't. He would listen to me. At first, I started reading books, which led me to podcasts. I had to know, first of all, what the heck happened? Where did we go? Where is Lee? I just couldn't think that he just blinked out of existence and went nowhere. And I was raised Catholic, so I was taught that we go to heaven, so to speak, but I didn't know what that meant. It sounded boring to me. Who wants to go to heaven and do you sit on clouds and play harps or just float around? It just didn't mean anything to me, really. So, but I had to know for sure where he was. I knew he existed somewhere. So, did a lot of work.
What was one of the first things that you did that you would say after the journaling that was really pivotal for you on your healing journey?
Probably reading books. I must have read 50 or 60 books in the first year alone. And mediumship. That was pretty primary. I've had several readings by wonderful mediums and was actually told I was going to write a book. And he actually gave pretty much the name of the book in a reading. So I think those three pieces, the reading myself, getting readings from mediums, and the journaling, those are the three key pieces for me. And other things have come into my life.
Then you have the Sonia Rinaldi film. How did that come about?
I went to the We Don't Die Boston conference put on by Sandra Champlain, and Sonia was the first speaker. She started speaking, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's really out there. I don't know if I believe this or buy into this. And then I told myself, you're here to learn. That was all kinds of speakers. The first time I ever attended anything like that. And it wasn't just for parents, it was all kinds of people, seekers wanting to learn. I said, just listen, be open. And I listened to her. And then when I went home, maybe 4 to 6 weeks later, Sandra said Sonia has some unknowns. And what that means is Sonia works with parents and people to bring in images and recordings of their loved ones. But sometimes they just come in like Camille's Aaron did. Sometimes they just show up. Well, so Sandra says there's a whole catalog of unknowns. So I thought, well, I'll go and look because I thought, what the heck? And I'll look. And the very first image I saw, I knew it was Lee. Because she had said, I have this little redhead. He had a little bowl cut as a boy because he appeared younger, maybe at about 10, 11, 12. And I sent a picture of him at that age to her assistant, Lisa Lanuski. Said she sent it to Sonia. Sonia confirmed that she believed it was Lee, but she goes, but who is the dog? And I was like, what dog? And over his head was a snout and two eyes. Buddy was there. I mean, it was unbelievable. But then, so a friend of mine, well, she has a podcast, Caroline Chang. She is in Helping Parents Heal, and somehow she connected with Robert Lyon, the producer. And so there was three of us that went to Caroline's house and spoke to Robert for the film and was interviewed. There's a lot of different parents from Helping Parents Heal that were in that film, and a lot of scientists.
Can you talk a little bit about Helping Parents Heal for people who are unfamiliar with that organization, please?
Yes, Helping Parents Heal is a wonderful worldwide organization. It's a nonprofit. It's not a grief group. Of course, you come in as a new parent, a bereaved parent, but you learn to become what they call a shining light parent. That's a term coined by Suzanne Giesemann. And what that is a parent who, through our kids that shine through us, we become these shining light parents who turn around and help parents that are new on this journey. It's just a wonderful organization, open to communication with our kids, talk about afterlife. We have a conference every 2 years. I've been to 2 of them now, and the energy there is amazing with the speakers. I'm an affiliate leader as well as a caring listener. So I have a group in my area, monthly meetings. And what caring listeners are is for parents who need that support, that one-on-one support. They can call. There's a whole list of caring listeners to talk to. And you can go to their website, which is helpingparentsheal.org.
I'm sure there's a part of you that wishes you never had to become a part of that, but it truly is a blessing that there is an organization like that. There's got to be emotions, feelings, a new way of being that only people who've gone through it can understand.
Yeah. And I tried those grief groups that are out there. I tried one and it was not for me.
When you talk about the grief groups, is it a different focus or?
I think they tend to, maybe not all of them, but the one I experienced, they focus more on the story, on what happened. Oh, what happened? How did your child die? It's just so, it's depressing. I heard parents that were there, had been there for like decades, still telling their story. And I remember thinking, has this become like a social club? If I have to be that sad for the rest of my life, I really don't want to be here. It just, they focus on what happened. This was awful. Woe is me, kind of. The whole energy was pretty depressing.
Yes. And I know who Suzanne Giesemann is, but if you would like to share with the listeners who Suzanne Giesemann is, that you mentioned her earlier.
Yes. Suzanne Giesemann is a wonderful medium. She was military, very military rigid kind of mindset, and then her stepdaughter passed, and she pretty much went on that path of, I've got to know where she is. I know she's somewhere. She must exist. With the focus and determination that she probably had as a military commander, I think, she just went all in on this path, and she's quite a well-known medium.
I learned from her story that her stepdaughter was crossing like the tarmac or the path.
Yes.
And it was a freak lightning storm. I believe is the story. And the reason I remember this is because it happened at the Cherry Point, North Carolina Marine Base. And that's where I was born. And
wow.
I actually moved from Minnesota to North Carolina last year. And so I thought it was really interesting because I did not know about that story. But when I first started connecting with spirit in a different way, the frequencies coming through my voice, It was shortly after my father-in-law had transitioned. I signed up for a session with this woman that I found through HemiSync or through the Monroe Institute, which led me to a woman named Suzanne Giesemann. I had no idea who she was. So I ended up on her website, and the next thing you know, I'm signing up for a tutoring session. And again, I had no idea who she was. And so I started talking with her on the phone, and we're talking about mediumship. I said, how do you do this mediumship stuff? I didn't know she was a teacher at the time. I didn't know she had a program, but she was a very patient, very kind presence. And I can absolutely see why she is as connected as she is. It's just really interesting how our worlds can intersect and connect. So yeah, Suzanne is very, very gifted, and she's very much respected with helping parents heal.
Yes, she is. She's the one that coined the term "shining light parents." So
shining light parents. Okay,
yes,
that's right.
Yes.
You mentioned that earlier.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And she has a documentary coming up too. Wolf's Message. She wrote the book, and that young man had passed by lightning as well. It's coming out soon, next month, I think, a documentary.
Oh, wow. I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing that. I had a chance too to take one of her classes in Texas. This was back in 2019. I had a chance to take one of her in-person classes. So that was really kind of a cool experience of connecting, doing mediumship. You've had a lot of signs and synchronicities that you talk about in your chapters, and in Gathering Up the Doorway, you talk about that. What are some of the gifts that you have received since he transitioned?
I think the gift of knowing, of really knowing how connected we are. Oh my gosh, I could almost cry. Just knowing that we are part of everything. And if you want to label it God or whatever you want to say, it is all one thing and we're all part of it. And I have chills. I never thought I was a judgmental person, but we are human. And I just look at everybody different, that we're all doing our best and we're all serving a purpose and we're all so many lessons there.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So then now you're a Reiki master and a certified grief educator. Were you working with energy prior to Lee's transition, or is this something that happened afterwards?
It was definitely after. I was starting it just before COVID hit, and then COVID, kind of set it aside. So I'm not really like a practicing Reiki person, but I did a lot of distant Reiki healing or sent it during COVID. I do self Reiki on myself every morning in the hot tub. I put the coffee on, I get out in my hot tub and I loosen up, and then I do Reiki on myself and start my day.
Fabulous.
So,
I did the same thing when I was, well, actually really early in my journey. So I'd say I was a very young mom, and this would have been about 23 years ago. There was a friend of mine who was telling me that the friend of hers, whose son was actively transitioning, young, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. And he did transition, but his mom was doing this thing that was making him feel better. It was Reiki. That's how I was introduced to energy and Reiki formally. When you have a little kid who's going through the transition process, asking for this energy connection, there's got to be something to it. I think the beautiful thing about, regardless of what modality a person chooses, whether it's Reiki or some other type of energy connection, it's like what you said, just that understanding that there is something more beyond. We're all connected. I think that's one of the cool things about working with energy. How about the certified grief educator piece of it? Because you're trained with somebody who's really well respected in this field.
I took a couple-month course with him, and I'm not doing it at this point, but I would like to go out and speak publicly about grief at some point, because we don't do it well. We don't talk about death, right? We don't have, we're afraid as a society we have that fear of death. And if people knew what lies beyond after this human existence, I don't think they'd have the fear. But because we have the fear of death, we don't grieve well. I mean, I remember having people like turn away from me in the grocery store, pretend they don't see me. Not so much anymore. I mean, my grief might be contagious, or the loss of my child. People are so fearful. And I just think that education is important.
Why do you think people are so fearful of the grieving process?
Well, I know I was, probably because of religion, because of what wasn't talked about. You felt you were gonna die and go to heaven or hell, right? God was gonna judge you in like a good egg or bad egg. Willy Wonka. And I found something that I wrote, I think in 2015 or 2016. I wrote my top fears, and one was that I was going to go to hell. And it's so absurd. Now that's not that long ago. And
Wow, that's tremendous growth.
yeah, I don't even. There's no God that judges us.
How do you know that? Like, I agree with you. I agree with you. But how do you know that?
It's just heartfelt. There wouldn't be somebody sitting there because it's all love. Because if there's that much love, that's a judgment. How can there be a judgment if you have love? That kind of love.
In one of your chapters, Excavating God, you had said, after reading Your Soul Plan by Robert Schwartz, I was able to let go of the idea God took my son and consider it might have been an agreement made in heaven for my spiritual growth. That is really profound. That is a huge shift in thought process. Here you are in 2015 writing, You're afraid of hell. And now here you are saying this may have been an agreement made in heaven for my spiritual growth. Was it a evolution that it took you to get to that point? Or was it an instant moment when you read it in the book? I'm just kind of curious to know about that.
It took some time. When I first read that, I thought, no way would I ever agree to such a thing. It was preposterous. No way. I was really almost insulted. But it took time, and I had to read it and really process. I can't say how long it took me, but what the conclusion was, I fully believe it. And it's the only thing that really makes sense, because otherwise, and I'm going to use the word that I don't like to use, his death, because we know we don't die, would have been senseless and pointless. And that didn't feel right any longer to me. I looked at it that way. I completely turned it around and looked at it differently. And then it clicked in and it made sense.
All right. I asked Camille the same question when she was here on the podcast. Upon reflection, can you look back and say, did Lee ever give you any sort of an indication or a belief that he knew he wasn't going to be here very long? Or ever gave any sort of a sense that this was coming?
He did mention when he bought his house, I think that was 2016. He said to his brother after he moved in, he said, I'm going to die in this house. Now, his brother told me that later. We took it as, I'm never moving again, as such a pain in the butt that this is it. I mean, he hadn't had a home before that he bought, but he had apartments and this and that. But what a weird way to put that, right? You're saying, I'm never moving again. I'll just stay here till I die, kind of thing. But no, I too had prior knowledge, I'll say.
You wrote about that in one of your chapters. Is it in the
Yeah,
Believe book that you wrote about this?
yeah. I had a dream 2 months before he passed, and I saw him lying in a casket, and I woke up crying. I had tears in my eyes, and I thought, what an awful dream. Why would you have such a dream? I think Spirit was trying to prepare me, as if you really could be prepared. But the other thing was, when I was pregnant for him, I was in the shower. It was about a week before he was born, and I remember just this feeling of dread came over me, and I said, I don't want to do this. And I was crying, and I don't want to do this. And I thought, he was my fourth child. I had birthed kids before, and so I thought, why am I having this feeling? And then he was born and weighing in at 11.3. So then I thought, that was a difficult birth, you might say. And I always thought that was why I had that fear, that dread. But now I wonder. I think maybe I knew what I had signed up for. My soul knew at that moment, and thought, don't want to do this.
Do you ever get a sense of why? There's no judgment here whatsoever, Roseanne. Why would you and Lee set up this agreement to have this type of experience?
Oh, that's a big question.
And if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to answer it. I'm just
I'll try. I mean,
okay.
I think for him, he had some anxiety, depression issues. Not like debilitating, but he did suffer with some. And he had some issue with the drug that they take in college sometimes to stay awake and
It's not Adderall,
yes,
is it?
yes,
Adderall.
Adderall.
Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. He did struggle with that for a good time. He started in college and even after college a little bit, and it was very concerning. And but he finally wasn't taking that. He was exercising. He was really doing well. And I'll never forget in the fall of 2017, he said to me, "I'm the happiest I have been in a long time." I think maybe that was his soul's way of saying, it was time that he completed what he was supposed to learn in this lifetime. I don't know. For me, I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing now, putting my words out there, hopefully to help others, because I always wanted to be a writer.
Do you think you would have written if this hadn't happened?
My intention was in retirement, to write. I had written some children's plays, and I have all these ideas all my life of things to write, but this is not what I would thought I would be writing, this kind of stuff. But here I am.
You write with such beauty and grace, and you can just feel the compassion with your words. What
You.
about you are such a gifted writer. It's just I sat there, I sat down and read your chapters, and it just flows, and that's such a gift. Now
Thank you.
you just came back from a vacation, a trip, and I would love for you to share with the listeners about that and the experience you had.
So I've been a fan and watched the Iditarod dog sled race. I started actually after Lee passed. I don't know how, but I started watching it. And so every year I do tune in. So I've always wanted to go to Alaska all my life. Finally, this was the year. And so we went there for winter to see the Iditarod. We dog sledded ourselves. Had all these fun experiences. But the really cool, interesting thing was another mom from Helping Parents Heal had a little 3-year-old girl that passed in 2022. And since then, she's been having people take rocks all around the world, placing them wherever in her daughter's honor. Little Brielle is her name, and she has a Facebook page, Brielle Rocks. And so when the stones are placed, then people take a photo of it and put it on her Facebook page. So they're everywhere. So anyhow, I had asked the 6-time Iditarod champion Dallas Seavey if he would place or take a rock with him to Nome in the race. And he said he wasn't racing, but then he mentioned this one young woman named Samantha that works at his kennel. She was going to be racing some of his dogs and a couple of her own dogs. So I contacted Samantha. She agreed to take the rock to Nome on her trip. She said she would carry it right here to keep it safe. They have a mushers dinner that we attended, and it was just to the kickoff of the race. So I handed the rock off to her, and then because we're in this tour, there was only 10 of us. We had this van. We were traveling from Anchorage to Dallas Seavey's kennel to dog sled. And so the tour guide said, "Oh, we have one of the mushers going to ride along with us." And who comes on the van? Samantha. Sat right near us. We got to ask all kinds of questions. She talked about her life as a musher, and so very interesting that happened. We went to the official start and we saw her take off on her first Iditarod, as a rookie, and her whole intention was just to make it to Nome. Nome is it's usually they had to change the route. It was going to be the longest race in the history of the race, 1128 miles. We saw her take off, and then a few days later, we were flown to a checkpoint, and it's a little native village of about 100 people. And we were flown there to watch the mushers come into this checkpoint. Well, there was a couple mushers already there, and we didn't see any mushers for a while. And then we saw one musher come in, and it was Samantha. And it was so interesting. I think no coincidences.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for people who are grieving the loss of their child and they're married or they have a
Mhm.
significant other? People handle grief differently. How do two people navigate that journey? What tips would you recommend for that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, as you said, we don't grieve the same. I think just recognizing that and allowing each person to grieve in their own way is the only thing you can do. Helping Parents Heal has a wonderful group for fathers only. And I think it's helpful for them. They can talk like guys. Men are just taught to, be strong, suck it up, and so I think they have a really hard time. We're a lot more open with our feelings and sharing. So I think just understanding that and allowing it and finding a group or a tribe. I don't think you can do this alone.
I don't think so either.
No.
The Helping Parents Heal organization, that is a nonprofit organization, right?
Yes.
I love that they have a group designated for the men. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
important. You have another chapter that you shared with me. It's called Ruby Returns. I would love for you to share that because I'm fascinated with this story. So if you can just talk to the listeners about this chapter.
So I was in meditation one day. This was in early 2020, just before COVID hit. And I never had experience, but a little schnauzer popped through my awareness. After the meditation, I came out and I told my husband. And he says, "That's so interesting. I was researching dogs and thinking I might surprise." He wanted to surprise me for maybe my birthday, which was not till June. And he goes, "I really like the miniature schnauzer." I said, "Oh, well, you think, okay, we're connected. That I picked up on something. No big deal." Well, then we were going somewhere. I think it was his brother's birthday. I was sitting in the car. We had an hour and a half ride, and I started Googling, miniature schnauzers. Well, I found out there was a local breeder. I was like, okay, I'll just look. Bunch of cute puppies, cute, doesn't hurt to look at them. Well, the one that I kept going back and looking at this one, and his face, the picture was blurry. It wasn't even a clear, cute picture of a puppy. It was blurry, and but I kept going back and looking at him. About the third or fourth time, I realized that he was available on the day Lee passed. He was available on January 7th. I mean, that was shocking, I thought. Well, we went to see the little dog. I hadn't had a dog for like 9 or 10 years, and all the responsibilities. And do we really want, we're retired. Do we really want to be saddled with a dog? Well, it only took 2 days. And I said, this was a gift. I know it was a gift from Lee. But the whole piece of Ruby was our family dog, our family beagle when the kids were growing up. I think it was 2011 we had to put her down. A couple months before the miniature schnauzer thing, I had an experience while I was falling asleep in bed. I felt a depression behind me, and I thought it was my husband Tom. And I thought, why is he getting in on the wrong side of the bed? And, and then I started to feel something walking around the bed, like an animal. At first, I had a bird, and I thought at first, could it be the bird? No, the bird doesn't weigh anything and it's locked in a cage with a cover over it. And then all of a sudden I thought, Ruby? And I totally feel now that Ruby reincarnated to help us with our healing path through this little dog. There's no other explanation. And I've never had that kind of experience as I'm falling asleep where I feel something physical like that. And it was clearly an animal walking.
I had that experience with my cat. Yeah, help him transition. And I felt that on my bed on a few
Wow.
occasions. And I've always wondered, and I'm going to ask a medium at some point about, I've got two cats,
Mm-hmm.
and the one that actually that we saw earlier, I suspect he was a reincarnation of the dog that I had when I was a little girl. Possibly this other male cat that I was just heartbroken over when he had to transition. But so I thought that was so cool. Let's continue with the story about Fritz.
When we brought him home, you think you've got a brand new puppy, and he was with his mom and all his siblings and everything, and I thought, oh, we're in for it, nights of crying. But that little guy came in and just looked around like he knew the place, like he just sat right down and looked around like, yep, I'm back, and never cried, like once, never whimpered from the very first night. He was just settled right in. And that too really led me to believe that it was Ruby.
Also, your writing guide. Did you mention that there's a guide that helped?
Oh yeah, I did when I was writing Believe. I was told that I was going to have a writing guide that was German, a German writing guide, and his name was really long, and it began with an F, and I would shorten it. His name was Fritz. And so I did name little Fritz the Schnauzer after my writing guide, which one night I was woken up and I heard German words. And it was when I was starting the process of writing Believe, they were strong German words. I don't know German, but I heard these words and I knew the tone of the words meant get on the book because I was procrastinating. I tried to start in 2019. It wasn't working. It wasn't until 2020 during COVID that I wrote it, but I couldn't escape the word book all the time. I was being chased. I was being dogged by this word. I'd wake up and I'd hear book. I'd just every time it wouldn't leave my head. So
Were you having these kinds of experiences prior to Lee's transition?
no, in the chapter of the latest anthology, I did in my 20s have a telepathic experience with somebody. There was a few of us sitting on a couch and I heard words and her voice and I leaned forward and looked at her and she shook her head like, well, that was me. So I had that experience once. I did have some, more premonitions like about my mom getting cancer, just little things. But I just was busy in my human life, my everyday human life, that maybe it was there on the periphery, but I didn't have time. I didn't allow it in.
With
So,
5 kids, you would have been extremely busy. Definitely that, and working
yeah,
and all that. So,
yeah,
I
yeah.
many people talk about their spiritual awakening. Sometimes it's a car accident, sometimes it's the big loss in somebody's life. Would you describe this as a spiritual awakening for you? Would you say that this started you on a new path then?
Oh, definitely. You have a choice. I could have chose to ignore what was right there before me, but no, it was definitely shake up to wake up kind of thing. It set my feet on a completely different path.
Getting this weird feedback. It's so funny.
Yeah.
This is the funniest interview of Rosa. I mean, I'm just like
You know,
these.
Lee was a bit of a jokester, so it may be him messing around.
I think it is because I'm getting weird feedbacks. It doesn't happen every time. Sometimes when I start talking, I hear this funny feedback, and then it's just
Uh,
like yeah. So okay, all right. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of the carbon monoxide awareness?
Carbon monoxide, as you probably know or may not know, is they call it the silent killer. And there's a reason. It's because you can't taste it, feel it, see it. It's the leading cause of non-lethal poisonings in the US, or at least in the US. And there's thousands of people that are sickened by it every year. Not as many deaths. Again, the educational part of that. People are still, they power outages and they're putting generators inside their home, or there's all kinds of ways. You should have your appliances checked every year. There could be a leakage in your water heater or your furnace. It doesn't take much to really sicken you. Like the symptoms can be kind of mild. You're just never feeling well, always feeling tired. They could be really vague, but educating ourselves, and fire alarms are talked about a lot. We've gotten a lot of information, and it just doesn't seem like the carbon monoxide is talked about as much.
You have a Facebook page that I
I
love
do.
to follow. And that was one of the first places that I really started thinking about and bringing a travel sized carbon monoxide detector. It would never even occur to me to do something like that.
Right.
And then you start hearing stories about people being on vacation and they're
Yep.
having accidents, and there's places that you wouldn't think, different hotels and that, where this is happening. So,
Yes.
and I need to get a travel one. I haven't done it yet, but I do need to get that. That's pretty easy to, is it easy to find?
You can go to Kitty or First Alert and look at the different things they have. Just a simple plug-in. Just go in your hotel room and plug it in. There are some travel ones that are fire and I think they're small units, fire and carbon monoxide that you could just have on your suitcase. But I just take a one that I plug into the wall and often forget it, but but then I get another. But we do have, in our community, we have probably given out 500 to 600 detectors through. We've had golf tournaments and basket raffles, so we distribute them throughout different ways through the community. But I'd like to also get into that educational piece for people because you're just not aware. You just don't think about it. We didn't have detectors in our home until this happened. I knew about it, but I was like, oh, we should probably have one, or I didn't really pay attention.
Give me some of your favorite signs and synchronicities
Oh,
that our Leah sent you.
oh gosh, there's there's been so many. Well, the one I just wrote about in the chapter. How could I one day be just laying in a hammock reading a book and just happen to look up and there's his name in the clouds? I'm like, how could this be? But one of my favorites, only because it's consistent, is he had the number 34 as a little guy playing football, and I see 34s constantly. I mean, I'll glance up at the clock, and of course, it's something 7:34, 10:34. I'm like, of course, all day long. It's just uncanny. We were at a family dinner. My husband tells the story that he hadn't told in years. And it was about a time when Lee and his brother, it was their birthday. They were a week apart, 2 years, but the birthdays were a week apart. And we had gone to Chuck E. Cheese. And the Chuck E. Cheese kept knocking my husband's hat off. And finally, he said, "You do that one more time, and we're going outside." So he tells the story, and of course, everybody's laughing. Our teenage grandkids are just, oh, never heard that story, thought it was hilarious. Well, a few days later, at the conference, we were sitting in a gallery, and Lee came through, and the medium said, "I'm getting the word Chucky." She thought at first it was the nasty character Chucky. She goes, "Redheaded Chucky, Chucky." And then she kept going on with all the evidence she was receiving. And we realized Lee was there. Oh, he was poking dad. And we realized it was for us. Just to me, proof that, yeah, he was right there at that dinner with us. He heard everything.
Lee has red hair. She probably saw
Yeah,
saw the red hair,
red
and then of
hair
course
and
the
thought it
Chuck
was
E. Cheese
Chucky and thought it
reference.
was the evil Chucky, but yeah, yeah. So
Oh.
it was things that she could not have known. Proof that yes, he was right there with the family. But as I always say to him, I said, I understand, I get it. I don't have to like it though, Lee. It's, you know,
No.
but
No. You don't have to like it.
I
That's
don't
okay.
I say that to him all the time.
But you're still moving forward, and with the words that you write, the awareness about carbon monoxide poisoning. You're still showing up because you're not done. You clearly have
Yeah.
some work to do. And that, I think, is the important thing. It's one foot in
Yeah.
front of the other. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, I love
And
that.
and these things really have brought joy back into my life. Knowing these things. Everything that I've learned and gained and the ways that I've grown and changed has allowed the joy to come back into my life.
Do you have any advice or do you have any tips that you would like to share with the listeners today that we haven't covered? Is there anything that's on your heart that you'd like to share?
Mostly, and we kind of touched, I think, on this, but how you really can't grieve in isolation. If you're grieving, whether it's a parent or a pet or a child, I mean, you need other people. You need to walk that path and get support, with other people. We're not meant to be in isolation grieving.
Hmm.
For instance, helping parents heal. I don't have to explain myself if I had tears, or everybody understands and is the support and the love that you can share is just a beautiful thing.
Roseanne, it has been a pleasure chatting with you today. And I will be linking all of your information in the show notes so people can find you and
Okay.
learn of your work. Thank you so much for sharing Lee with us today. Fabulous books that you've contributed to, different chapters. And there's Believe at the bottom. Love that. That's available on Amazon as well, right?
Yep, they all are.
They're all available on Amazon. Look at that.
Yes.
Well, you
Yeah.
have been a very busy lady in the last few years, haven't you?
I have. And there's, I'm sure, more to come.
Your story isn't finished. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh,
And
thank
for those of
you.
you that are listening, thank you for joining us. And until next time, please remember, we are fully supported, we are fully protected, and we are fully loved. Thank you so much. Love and blessings.